So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. A very warm welcome to everyone here. The Serica Initiative, whose mission is to amplify AAPI voices and communities, is thrilled to host our webcast today, Leading with Impact, celebrating Asian American voices in the boardroom, where we will feature two outstanding Asian American women corporate board directors. I am Anla Chang, CEO and Chair of Serica Initiative. This webcast is very meaningful, not only to me, but to our community as we celebrate Women's History Month and International Women's Day this March. Our moderator is Lisa Lim today. Lisa serves on the boards of Williams Marston, Serica Initiative, where we're very honored to have her, All Stars Project, and 50/50 Women on Boards. Prior to that, she was a senior partner at EY and served as the audit committee chair of HF Foods Group. Joining me are Jane Lee, the board chair of Semtech, a semiconductor company. Jane also serves other public company and PE-backed boards in the industrial technology, AI, and SaaS disciplines. Prior to that, she was a COO and C-suite executive across the semiconductor, IT networking, and cloud computing fields. Also joining us is Judy Lee, the co-founder of Dragonfly, which serves global Fortune 500 clients in risk management and strategy. She splits her time between New York and Asia, including Japan, Singapore, and Indonesia. Today, Judy leverages her global experience in serving large public company boards in Asia, including DBS Bank, and companies in finance, real estate, and infrastructure series. She is also the co-chair of Women Executives on Boards. We would welcome you to visit our website. And also, please take a look and mark your calendars. Our annual gala, where we empower all of us, is happening this year at April 30th, and we hope to be celebrating through midnight, which kicks off the AAPI Heritage Month in May. So make sure you mark your calendars and join us at our incredible gala, where we'll be honoring Steve Chen of YouTube, Yashin Wang from MIT and AASF, Sonia Chen, CEO of the hotel group, the Carlisle in New York, and the Rosewood Group, and of course we will also be honoring Alexis Colvin, who is the senior medical officer for U.S. Open and Mount Sinai. So let me pass on to Lisa. Lisa, take it away, and thank you so much for leading this webinar today. Have a great session.
Thank you so much, Anla, for your introduction. And, as you can tell, I'm truly very excited to have a conversation today with our two fantastic panelists, Judy Lee and Jane Lee. Today's discussion is going to focus on the board journey, Judy's and Jane's perspective about board leadership and hot topics. Thereafter, we will open our webcast to a 10-minute Q&A before we close. So please feel free to type in your questions into the chat box. Now let's kick it off with topic number one, which is the board journey. We know that serving on a board is the result of a journey. Judy, we'll start with you. You've spent your executive career in New York and Japan by working in finance and energy. Can you share with us how you started your board journey and how have you grown since you became a board member?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you. It's been very interesting 14 years. Actually, I started on the board of my undergraduate NYU Stern School 14 years ago. And 12 years ago, I was part of the Royal Dutch Shell Group in Japan. And I actually served as an executive director, and it was for their startup 100% owned solar business. And that was a real interesting period because 12 years ago was really the area of kind of the new wave of kind of solar energy, and that was innovative, and that was also building an international business. But serving as an executive director and operating and having P&L responsibility was really very interesting, but within a culture that I've never worked before. So there were a few firsts for me. I was the first kind of of women board director within the group companies in Japan. I was also the first time I was actually operating in Japan for semiconductor thin film CIS solar panel manufacturer upstream and then downstream. And then after I left that role in 2016, I happened to have been surfing and watching what was happening and there was a Women on Boards program at Harvard Business School. And so I did that program, and that really was something that was an eye-opener. It was an all-women program, and it was the first time that I sat in a room with 65 amazing C-suite women from 30 countries. And from my original background in investment banking to energy, having that diversity was really very validating. And so I loved it. And since then, since 2016, I've served on 8 corporate boards. I typically, because of my risk background, serve on audit and risk committees, but I also serve on nominations committee as well as compensation committee and also sustainability committee, given my renewable energy background. So that's just been my board journey. And I think it's been very much around governance, but also literally around different sectors. And given my background as a management consultant under Dragonfly, which I started 25 years ago, it also gave me a window into thinking about strategic risk and quantification of risk. And that's very much around the role that I often sit on and serve on the board roles in that capacity. From the last 14 years, I think what has been really interesting is the mix and change of the composition of boards. And so I've seen that, and definitely in Asia, where I spent a lot of my time. But personally, it's the perspective. So I think the board exposure had given me literally a wider perspective around ecosystem, stakeholder management, understanding, because I spend half the time between Asia and also New York, which is my hometown. So it gives me a very different perspective. And now in the heightened kind of geopolitical, and also if we look at the geoeconomics kind of mix, it really gives me a different sense because you're anchored in 2 time zones. And I'm actually sitting in Singapore right now. So it's that perspective, I think, that is important. And as a board director, to kind of lend and to understand and interpret from both sides. And being an Asian American, I think it's very important to make sure that the communications, the conversations, the understanding, and the perspective is shared. All right. So having 50% of my time in each time zone really helps.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I know you're also a very well-known coach and mentor to a lot of members at women execs and boards. What would be some advice that you would like to share with our aspiring directors?
So thanks for that. And thanks also, Lisa, as part of our network as well. I think the first thing I will always share is around the mindset shift, because what I'm seeing more and more is the opportunity for executives to also serve on boards. So I think it's a great way of seeing the other side of the table, right? So if you're an executive, to understand the shareholder's perspective early on in your career is, I think, a really value-added leadership perspective. And so mindset shift around executive role, but when you're sitting at the table, what does the governance role mean? And I think that mindset is around how do you actually lend your business judgment? So to do that, you prepare obviously from your domain expertise or your expertise in looking at how you would understand when you're presenting to the board, but on the other side, when you're kind of listening to management, right? So really knowing your way around the boardroom in the sense of what are the roles of different committees, what are the charters, what's the language, and that's beyond the kind of the technical aspects of the boards. Really know where you bring value, right? So for many of us, you've been in different industries and different careers. I do like the fact that if you're an executive and you're in one domain, you often would have a conflict of serving on a board in that sector. But you can lend your skills and your leadership into another sector and maybe an adjacency. And I would really advocate for that, because what you actually get back is insights into overall governance, but also when you have to present to boards and you're making investments around really what the language is and how to kind of influence decisions at that level. So I would kind of recommend all of us start thinking about that journey.
Thank you, Judy. And let's move on to Jane. Jane, you've been on the boards for over 15 years also. And there's a lot of people on this call who may be on one board and they would like to build a board portfolio. What's your advice?
So I didn't start off with a systematic plan of going to build a portfolio, but there's one thing that's very consistent in my career is I started with a passion to grow technology companies. And to that extent, it was a little more intentional. I started with telecom industry, with Corning, and grew market share for Corning. And then I moved on to startup companies and build teams in very different industry, in semiconductor, photonics, and in charge of all the go-to-market functionalities, and to consistently think about how different technology businesses to grow, scale, and constantly re-innovate themselves. So from telecom moved to semiconductor, and then I came back to what my engineering training was, which was networking systems, wireless systems. So I ran operations in IT, networking, cloud, and cybersecurity, and storage. So it turned out by being reasonably successful at running many different technology operations that prepared me to be a board candidate that really thinks through with management as they look at every aspect of business, that how their customers operate, how their customer operate. Today I sit on two public boards that's in semiconductor industry. And historically, the boardroom of Semi more consists of semiconductor CEOs and operators. So I think by having a very different career path provide me this unique voice in the boardroom, and able to look beyond just Semi, and really think about where the market is going, and help asking the right questions, and help management to really think beyond their peer group. So that would be my advice. I'm always a believer that do what you're passionate about is the best way to have a successful career. So today I focus more, instead of running technology company, I focus more what you call board portfolio. But in essence, I'm doing the same thing, which is growing technology businesses for different companies.
Thank you, Jane. And what's really beautiful is that Judy talked about adjacencies. You leverage that, and then you come on and you talk about how you started with one sector or one discipline and you moved on to the adjacencies. And then, as you know, as we prepped for this, I also learned that a lot of your board seats came from people who knew you when you were an executive, and also people who know you by sitting on boards. So one of the themes that we would like to share with everybody is think of your network. Just like Jane and Judy, a lot of what they have achieved is because of the people they know and staying in touch with those and giving your best when you have the opportunity to be on boards or when you have the opportunity to meet people. So let's move on to our second topic, which is board leadership. We'll start with Jane because this is so important. Board oversight and the support of the CEO is so critical to the success today of corporations. Jane, you serve as the chair of Semtech. What is the role of a chair and why is it important?
I would summarize into a couple of aspects. The number one role of a chair is to set the board agenda. So to set board agenda, it's a transparent dialogue among the independent board directors and to coordinate with the CEO and management team. So it's a very important task as a board chair. The second thing is the CEO relationship. When I was elected by the board to be the chair, I focused on that a lot because I saw boards that when chair and CEO don't have a good relationship, they really struggle. So I spend a lot of time to dialogue with the CEO, understand what's going on, and vice versa, so the CEO can understand how the board is thinking. The next thing, which perhaps not talked about often enough, is board culture. Now, boards have different culture for various reasons: history, composition of the board, CEO style, etc., etc. Culture is very, very important because to be able to dialogue openly, to be able to express different opinion, to be able to include all the board directors, the chair plays a very important role in that. So that's the third thing. Now, the fourth thing I want to mention, it's hopefully, you sit on very good boards and don't face crisis too much. But I want to say, in my experience, every board, if you sit on the board long enough, you face some kind of crisis. So how to prepare for crisis, how to get the board ready, get the management team ready, and get everybody to think about these scenarios and therefore systematically prepare for it. I think of it as an important aspect of the chair role as well. And of course, it's obvious, it's very important to help board get organized. And it's not just about chair, but it's also the whole board leadership, committee leadership, succession planning for this leadership role, and the CEO succession. So these are the aspects that I think about on a daily basis in my chair role.
Yeah, and thank you for introducing the topic of preparing for a crisis. And one of those that you faced with one of the companies you serve on is the activist shareholder. Can you share with us what was the experience and what did you learn and how did you lead the board in this particular situation?
I faced two activism campaign in my public board journey. I started with private boards, as Lisa, as you know, a few years before that. So the thing that really different about public board is one of the things is activist campaign. So I think for the first campaign, we were not as aware it could happen at Nose Board. But on the other hand, we did get organized pretty quickly, a lot of dialogue amongst ourselves, have great advisor. So the outcome was really good. My biggest learning was also it's great for board to be our own activist. We have to challenge our thinking and think about what are the strategic gray areas that we haven't thought about and confront these gray areas. Then we'll be in much better shape when activists does surprise us. The other thing I want to share about activism is a time like that, then it really tests who the board is. It tests who the management team is as well, but who the board is and your true nature comes out, and you really have to think hard about who you are as a board director, and because that's what activists do, is challenge not only the strategy but also the CEO and sometimes target individual directors. The last thing I want to say is having the experience of the first activist campaign really helped us at Semtech when we faced activists because being an advocate at the board about the activism readiness, and we were much well prepared when activists showed up at the Semtech board. We had a playbook, and we have a very defensible strategy, and we had a plan about the company, the CEO, and the board, and the negotiation was had a really good outcome for the shareholder and the company.
Thank you, Jay, for sharing those experiences. Let's turn it over to Judy. Judy, I know initially when you were talking about your board journey, you addressed some of the attributes of a board member. If there's anything else you'd like to add, and then let me continue with a follow-up question, which is, Jane talked about shareholder activism as one of her challenges that she had faced. I'm sure you've faced your own too. Perhaps if you could, address both the attributes and then, one or two examples that you'd like to share with the board and where you were able to exhibit, board leadership.
Okay, great. I really appreciate what Jane has been talking about around understanding what governance and the different roles, and often, especially in crisis situations, it goes deeper than that, right? So the line between governance and management is a bit more kind of fluid there because you need to step in more and work the problem together, right? And I think that's very important. So what that means in terms of attributes of a board member is be able to actually think in scenarios, but also have kind of when we talk about that broad strategic perspective and some depth in areas, right? Where you could really provide insights at the detailed level, whether it's about kind of changing business mix or impact of technology and so on. So the idea around an attribute is very, very, very much around relevancy, right? So the issue around keeping relevant, especially for members who actually had kind of stepped off their executive career and are maybe longer standing board members, you need to really be engaged in terms of what is happening today and, how much volatility that we see in the markets, that impact that, to see kind of operations, technology, people, the changing mix of all of that, and within an environmental framework of geopolitics, and inflation, and protectionist policies, and so on. That entire perspective has to be, looked at, and so it means that in terms of preparedness, and I go back to the word being prepared all the time, is that you need to read broadly, you need to think, you need to engage people in that industry. So if you're serving on the board of the industry, don't just know the company, but you really need to know who are the players in that sector, and then have avenues to speak to them to understand what is going on. And also outside that sector, in the supply chain or in the other industries that are related to that. It could be your client base. It could be, where talent is going to be coming from, where your competitiveness is going to be challenged from different industries that are cherry picking, what you're doing. So the idea of the attributes is really having that lens of anticipating that risk, looking at different stakeholders that are not what you may think are your traditional stakeholders, right? Because you're going to manage a wider set. And then, of course, specifically, I go back to understanding the board roles, right? So if you are serving in different functions, truly understand what drives the economics of that business. That's kind of the deep dive aspect, to understand what drives profitability, what drives change, what drives the strategic changes, what are the fulcrum points. And so it's not around just here and now and the things that you're dealing with, but can you anticipate what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years or even longer, and then bringing that to bear and understanding the conversations and doing the so what's and dynamically having those conversations and bringing up issues that may not be easy conversations. So the ability to kind of dampen down kind of that human characteristics of your ego and just ask a curious question of like, I may not know this, and especially if you don't come from the industry, but have we considered this, right? And then the other aspect of, depending on the role you play, and I find myself also adding a different voice, you want to make sure that there isn't groupthink. You want to make sure that there is cognitive diversity, right? And that perspective is critical. So it reminds me of what Ruth Ginsburg used to say about the Supreme Court. Although she wasn't as liberal as you would expect, because the court was getting more conservative, she felt she had to play a counterweight. So sometimes at the board level, if you hear all the voices, you may also really believe in that direction, but it's very important to say, well, have we considered the opposite view or the alternative view? Just to make sure it had been considered, it was on the table, and then it is something that we are not blindsided by. So I think that's very important. That characteristic is not always easy. It's not always easy to speak against the tide, so to speak. But you're not doing that because you're objecting. You're doing that because it's important to say, yes, that was part of our consideration. And we understand that may not be an issue now, but let's not take it off the table. We need to kind of constantly question our assumptions so that we're not blindsided, as I said. So again, wide exposure, being relevant, being able to ask questions in a constructive but maybe sometimes challenging way, to be able to contribute beyond your domain, but also keep up with everything that's going on by connecting to other industry players, outside industry players, and making sure you're bringing that insight to the table. And then you asked about, the other things and the crisis. I think that's exactly what Jane said is so true. If you have a well-run company, very strong governance, and the level of intensity is different. But when you're in a crisis, it's all in, right? And that's exactly where, the board strength has to come to bear, and everyone has a role, right? And so I served on the board as a IFC nominee director to the top bank in Sri Lanka. So, as you know, Sri Lanka actually went through a major crisis, and we also had a transition of our CEO who came into CEO's role. It was a normal transition, but within a month of his taking on that role, the government defaulted in the US dollar denominated bonds. And I was chairing the risk committee, and this is a bank. So you could imagine it went through a huge period of crisis management, so to speak, right? And of course, we, came out very well, and the industry is stable and all of that now. But that's when, you have the time that you need to allocate, and you need to anticipate allocating extra time that you wouldn't have in normal, times had to do. So it's all in. It's not all in time-wise, but all in cognitively as well, and thinking through everything to anticipate, because things are fast, decisions have to be made that are very consequential. So I think those are the things that, I would, share with everyone. But going through that and going back to your first question today, you learn about yourself a lot more, especially if you go through crisis at, the executive level, or certainly at the governance level.
Thank you so much, Jane and Judy, for this discussion, because what you brought up is, serving on a corporate board is not a walk around the park. It can be intense. It may need to be all in. The key here is all of us have our core competency, but serving on a board, we need to be broad. We have to be business advisors to the CEO, and we've got to think of who our stakeholders are, and, our dedication to the company, which is the number one responsibility. And you bring up, both of you brought up examples that being on a board is a team sport. It's a lot of listening. It's a lot of continuous learning. So thank you for those concrete examples. Now let's move on to the hot topics. And of course, we will start out with AI. We do know it's very difficult today for anybody to ignore the impact of AI. AI has generated efficiencies in our personal productivity, back office, and customer service. Today, it is a board imperative to address AI in innovating products and services, including its impact on the entire organization, talent, and risk management. Jane, we'll start with you because you're based in Silicon Valley and you sit on various technology boards. What board conversations are you having on AI from a strategic and governance perspective? And what are the consequences of not proactively addressing the AI strategy?
Yeah, so I would say, Lisa, we talked about this a little bit too. If we look at the governance work, most of the time the board is more in the background and help management team to think through risks, mitigate the risk. We still need to do that with AI. AI bring a very different risk aspect. The board need to provide oversight to. But on the other hand, I also think of AI as a great opportunity for the board to perform, maybe an opportunity that the board didn't have in the past decade. The reason I say that is a lot of company perhaps are not spend enough time thinking about the impact of AI thoroughly. And the board can play an important role in promoting and motivating the management team to do that. While the guardrail is important, ethics considerations are important. The disruption AI will bring, not only for organization efficiency, but to the business itself, is going to be more than what most company realize today. We're watching the SaaS business, of course, the private equity I work with is SaaS centric, so we're dealing with that every day. While we are all looking at that, it's not just SaaS business. There are some businesses thinking, oh, we are hardware oriented, or we are service oriented, so perhaps it will be we have a little more time, I think. That likely is underestimation. I think a board here should put on very strategic thinking hat and really help the management to think about the disruption. And on top of that, Lisa, as you mentioned, the productivity enhancement is going to be tremendous. And at Semtech, we have luckily at the same time I became chair, we put in technology and strategy committee, and we have multiple board directors that are pretty AI driven. So the management team, as a result, all in parallel, has always been very, I guess, leading edge on the AI practice. Then on the other board, it becomes very helpful for me to translate to promote that practice to the other boards and to get other management team also think about the have we done enough? And of course, you had lot of announcement last week. Company came out said that we're laying off X percentage employees because of AI, and that's one of the things in the boardroom. I mean, we asked the management team, when you hire any additional people, have you asked the management team to that whether it's something AI can do instead. So I think it's a very exciting time. Also does require the board to be much faster on the learning curve as well. Yes, we have a room full of extremely successful, experienced people. On the other hand, we are all new, relatively new to the AI. So board education becomes really important, and I think it's a great opportunity for the board to play its role and make sure the company end up in a few years leading the pack versus being left behind in this transformation.
Thank you, Jane. And you bring up, very important pieces about addressing the strategy today, because what we saw in the news 3 weeks ago that led to the drop in the share prices of SaaS companies was Anthropic releasing new tools. And people were very concerned, is this going to be the Kodak moment for those types of companies? And AI is progressing so quickly. So it's really a board imperative to address this as a strategy and also as a defensive measure. Like, how can I innovate? And who could potentially disrupt me because of the AI tools that are out there, because they can develop much faster. So let's turn it over to Judy. Agentic AI, that's the big conversation going on right now. Prior to this year, most of the risk management discussions on AI focused on data privacy. It focused on managing shadow AIs and having ethical AI. Now we know agentic AIs are being deployed all over the organization. And the agentic AIs talk to each other. They have access to a lot of databases depending on what authorities they have. And they also interact with third-party software. And with your experience in risk management, what's the latest thinking on AI risk management right now?
Okay. I think I just frame it from the board perspective. The issue is around what kind of trade-offs, right? Because on one hand, the competitive space that, Jane is talking about, this is something that every company has to embrace. but what's the speed of that and how ready the company is? It's not about the technology readiness, but it's also the culture and the capability readiness of the people, right? But then it's also around the data and the development of the use cases and the applications in the company, right? So on one hand, it's around making progress, being competitive, and making sure that, as we know, disruption is really critical and how to anticipate that to kind of make sure that we're in line with the progress. But on the other side, it's also we don't know what the guardrails are because this is developing. It's developing at light speed, much faster than anything we've seen develop before. And it's being adapted and applied. And that's with some aspects of the company and some industries. But then the other aspect is that there's anxiety. So there is also, let's say, anxiety and fear of adaptation and testing and experimentation as well. So what I'm seeing is actually both things, right? People are very optimistic, very positive. You see valuations, you see the energy, what happened in 4 years is like in 4 months in terms of the numbers of people who are doing that. But we're actually talking about enterprise and institutionalization of AI and agentic AI. We're not talking about home use, right? And so it takes on different aspects from a risk, compliance, governance approach. And I think companies are just beginning to grapple with this issue. I mean, quite frankly, the technology is evolving so fast, and then regulation will not be able to catch up, and that's very clear. So how do we self-regulate? And how do we self-regulate within sectors, right? And how do we self-regulate within companies? And that is really the risk tolerance and the risk governance aspect that every company and every board needs to make a decision on. Okay. And that's the way it's going to be a judgment. It's going to have many factors. And what I see happening is people at the board level are really going out to do their research, to talk to companies, to kind of speak with technology companies. And there are a lot of also preparedness that you're looking at. What does your HR as a strategic HR need to do about your workforce management? Jane talked about companies that have been, laying off workers because of the technology productivity advantage, right? So the productivity efficiency advantage is one aspect, right? But the other aspect is truly the applications that change kind of the revenue side of the equation. Right. And I think that takes a lot more integration to the business lines to understand what can be done, and also, across kind of your client space, right? Because that changes that fabric completely. There is no one answer to this, as again, it's about the mindset of risk tolerance, it's the learning, the education, it's how widely spread it's going to be within the companies, within the industry, and really what the applications are. So depending on what the applications are, how much it is going to impact, what is the use case? Is it going to impact the cost structure? Is it going to impact the revenue? Is it going to impact your clients? There are a lot of unknowns. And because of that, I think that everything needs to be looked at within a framework of first of all, around innovation balanced with resilience, being able to understand what truth is, right? And understand that where we're going to be able to, put that analytic on top of what data that we're going to put in. And I think companies are going to have to kind of ring fence it to their data to begin with, and their internal use. So the question I was also thinking through with the conversations I had earlier in my day was around, is there truly that kind of data protection, even if we're actually using enterprise systems, right? And that's a question, right? So the inference that AI and agentic AI could have on the data, so they may not be able to use the exact data point, but the inference of the data actually is open, right? And is shared, so to speak. So that's also something to think about from a governance and risk management point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Judy, for summarizing it so well, because this is a very, very complex issue and where it's evolving very quickly. But, every company has to face it, whether it's from a revenue side, whether it's from a cost and productivity perspective, talent, supply chain, manufacturing, everything is impacted. And, you laid out very nicely about what is your risk tolerance, because that defines how you put your guardrails and how you design your governance around it. So talking about resilience, let's move on to the final hot topic, which is geopolitical risk and resilience. We've all seen from the last weekend, the latest Middle East conflict. And that, geopolitical risk, whether it's US tariffs on trade, the Middle East, it impacts supply chain, it impacts, distribution, logistics, market access, capital markets, as well as inflationary pressures. How do you, Judy, work with boards and management to prepare for geopolitical uncertainty and build resilience?
Well, first of all, I just want to share that, notwithstanding everything that's going on, I just wish that everyone is safe and their families and friends are safe. So that's very important, so I wish there, to be resolution of all the issues and the conflicts. Geopolitics is not just geopolitics, but it's the geoeconomics, techno-economics. So they're all linked, right? And we saw that even before, during the different crises that we've had. We had many global crises in the years, whether it was the global financial crisis or COVID, and even before that with the different market crises that are specific. Every one of that has elements of geopolitics, and the accumulation of all of that, particularly in this latest number of years, with supply chain disruptions, really lend itself to the idea of, the nationalism, protectionist policies, and sovereignty and independence. And I think that became heightened because of all of those issues, right? That came to kind of bear. It's being able to anticipate where your operations are, the clients you're impacting, your supply chain, so all of that. And we're in a globalized world. So even if that kind of value chain of your businesses don't cross boundaries, right? And let's say you're in the US in terms of your whole value chain, your competitive space is impacted by what's happening in the rest of the world, right? So you're not immunized from any volatility that's happening in the marketplace, right? If nothing else, inflation, right? Energy costs, like as many of us will be experiencing, right? So you need to anticipate. It's going back to kind of the scenario analysis we talked about, right? And it's around this is the kind of risk that you're not in a position, because these are exogenous risks, right? You're not being able to mitigate, but it's about developing resiliency, maybe different pathways, especially around supply chain and different pathways, alternatives, and then also cushion. At the end of the day, if there's volatility, you have to look at liquidity as a cushion. So it's capital cushion, staying power, being able to weather the storm, and also how to build cushion within workforce as well, right? Because there won't be as much transferability necessarily, and talent might be much more localized. So depending on your span of operations, that's also something to consider. I would say that it's so fluid right now, right? So the timing of everything, the change of geopolitics, right? So there's one aspect that every company has to make sure they look at is the compliance of geopolitics, the shifting partners, the shifting of sanctions or everything else, right? So there's a compliance, governance, risk management aspect, but then it's a competitive risk management aspect and strategic aspect that has to be looked at as well.
Yeah, thank you, Judy, for summarizing it so well. And if we look at this area of geopolitical changes and building resilience, it is now a constant. It used to be, talk about geopolitics maybe once a year. Now, this is like a regular board topic because of the level of change. It's so dynamic in the world today. So wonderful discussion on hot topics, AI, geopolitics, and resilience. We'd like to move now to our Q&A. And let me just, look at the questions here. And, one of our attendees said, if I'm earlier in my career, how do I best prepare myself to be a board candidate, what are the steps that you would recommend for someone who is new to the board member scene? Judy, would you like to take that?
Sure. I think first of all, if you could actually have an opportunity to serve on a board or subsidiary board of your own company, if you have a very large group of company, I think that's great exposure and experience. So an executive role sitting on some subsidiary or partners, right? You may have joint venture companies in your network of that. So raise your hand, right? That's a very important aspect. The other aspect is just there are so many really strong programs. Like I went to the Harvard Women on Boards program, and they also have a number of other governance programs there. But NACD or the relevant, equivalents in your other countries, I think that's very important. It also allows you to network. Right. So not just the technical aspects of understanding board composition, board governance and the roles and responsibilities and the code of, the legal framework, but it's also around the network and having conversations with people that experience and asking the questions and being in the room and having that dynamic question. And it's also then understanding at what point in your career that starts being a value added leadership set of skills that you want to add on, right? But it does take an investment in your time, and you need to plan for it. And it also is not something that happens overnight. Like you might say it will take you probably 1 to 2 years in terms of the board journey, right? As you think about what you target, what kind of role, what kind of experience that you want to have, from, let's say, your first board role, right? So please take time to think that through. And part of that is also realizing and honing your thought process and around what contribution, what value added would you like to bring to the board? It could be your domain expertise like technology, right? If you have background, I think that's really something that many boards are looking at right now, or it is having operated in many time zones and operation experience on the ground in different cultures, right? Because of the geopolitics, I think that lens or strategic thinking. So really think about what are your verticals, what are the areas that you could really contribute.
Thank you, Judy. Like for me, my expertise would be to be, qualified financial expert. So as you say, Judy, it's what is your domain expertise, and be proud of your domain expertise and then broaden it.
Yes.
Another one is mentorship. Um, Jane, would you like to take the question on, how do I find my professional mentor during my board journey? And what's your advice on mentorship search?
So, if I think about my own career, I had a lot of more informal mentors and formal mentors. So, first, I want to say is really always seeking folks around you that can help with your career growth. And they can be your colleagues, sometimes can be your own boss, or folks in different BUs, but you respect. So mentorship is very important, but don't think about it as just that one or two formalized mentorship. There are a lot of great people. If I think back in my career, they're my friends, but they're also my mentors. I can call upon on different questions. If I have a board interview, I'll probably reach out to you to say, and any thoughts. So that would be my first advice. Second of all, it's very helpful in formalized mentorship to have somebody that traveled a similar journey For example, at one of my boards, we are looking at mentorship for the management team. Then we reviewed some of the mentorship didn't work out as well because if you want the CFO to be more successful, you likely have more success to have the mentor be CFO, then when moved on to be CEO, board directors, versus somebody who is CHRO, and then grew to be in other bigger roles. I think the key is be very open-minded and be rally yourself with a group of great, successful people. Would be my advice.
Thank you, Jane. Let's move on to the next question, and I'll throw it to Judy. How can we improve Asian representation in boards?
Good question.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's about being prepared and putting yourself out there, right? And it's not just the Asian representation. I think women in general. I do as coaching, as Lisa said, to kind of women in our network, and we often don't lean in. We also don't make it known that we're interested, and so I think that's a very, very important mindset shift, starting with the fact that you do have the capability to serve on a board and then to do the work to prepare yourself. And then, someone asked in the chat around networking. I think that's critical because it's part of the conversations. But when I talk about preparing, I really mean that mindset shift, right? So following my kind of Harvard program, I was actually, even if I was standing on a line, and I share this with some of my kind of, program classmates and so on, I would like kind of on the phone look at company charters and read through that, right? I would read through, different backgrounds of sitting board directors of different industries. So I was actually constantly learning every day, right? Just getting prepared, getting the mindset, just kind of being in that flow of trying to understand more and more. So I look at this differently, right? If it was your career, right? If you look at this as your executive career, how would you plan that? Right? You would actually automatically start thinking, oh, these are my steps. This is how I would, do the work. This is how I would reach out to people, et cetera, et cetera. It's no different with a board career, right? So if you take the mindset, it's a different stage, but it's a board career, then I think it's much more intuitive then for you to say, oh, okay, I think I understand. You could take it with the same discipline and approach versus opportunistically, if that's, what you're looking for.
Hey,
Thank you.
Lisa, it's
Yes.
an issue I'm passionate about, so I would like to add
Yes,
to
please.
what Judy said, which I totally agree. It's just a different angle of looking at this. I'm a Chinese American myself, and one of the things once I start to join on board, I found very helpful is we should not be shy about recommending fellow Asian Americans either to our own boards or to other boards, the qualified, the successful ones, of course. Because we brought up, well, at least I brought up with this culture that we should be not only humble about ourselves, but our whole family, whole group. And I think that's a cultural barrier we can help us to break through is to help each other. The other thing is to be direct to each other too. That myself and perhaps my Asian American friends, it's very helpful if we give each other good advice in terms of how we can, be more ready what areas we could self-develop to be a better board director or board director candidate. So I just want to add these 2 points because it is an issue I'm personally pretty passionate about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Judy and Jane. And as we go into the lightning round, one final advice that you would like to give to our audience. Perhaps a question is, what did you wish you knew when you started on this board journey that you'd like to share with our audience? Judy, should we start with you and then followed by Jane?
Okay, so I'll take it from the perspective of a sitting board a member. So you're already serving on boards, and I think that going back to what Jane said earlier, I think it's actually the nuances of board culture. Okay, and the first thing to remember is you're part of that board culture, right? So you're not standing outside that, you're in it, right? So how do you actually co-create that board culture that becomes effective and collaborative, right? And but also constructive challenge. So that board culture is critical, especially we're building a board culture. And then if we go into a crisis, that is even at a premium because you know how to work together, you know how to have the tough conversations, you understand the perspective of each other. And so that when there is something that you have to come together with high intensity, you know, you're already a team that works well together. So I think that's very important. It's different, right? Then I would say, at the executive level, right? Because you, at executive level, your team, you spend every single day together, so to speak, right? But your board doesn't meet that often. So how much time you need to invest beyond the time that you're serving on the board committees and the board itself, the main board, is time that you need to spend. You need to really commit to that. And that means reaching out personally, maybe doing one-on-ones, not just with the board members, but with management teams. So it is a lot around learning, communication, and there's a huge human factor to it that you just can't do by just reading documents, okay? And so it's about effectiveness of moving an organization through human capital management at all levels.
Yes, and serving on a board may take 200 hours per year for a public company board. And as a chair, Jane would spend more than 200 on the company that she chairs. Thanks, Judy. Jane, any final comments?
So I agree with Judy's final thoughts too. I want to just quickly add to that. I think you have to think about what kind of board director you want to be. There are different style of board director as well. In addition to we all should be collegial, good listener, and to help you think about that, it's I ask myself the question: if you were the CEO, what kind of board director would you like to have? And if you, on the other hand, if you're a shareholder, what kind of board director you would like to see serve on your portfolio company board? Of course, the answer is not just one type, several types. Some perhaps more vocal, more outspoken, and some are more considerate. It's something you want to think about is what kind of board director you want to be, and therefore in your networking journey, in your interview, in your conversations with the recruiter, it comes through. Your intention will come through.
Thank you, Jane and Judy. And as we close, let me just summarize 2 or 3 key points here, for those who are looking to land their first board or to add to their portfolio. Think of the skills needed in the boardroom. How do you fit in? How can you be an advisor, to the CEO and the C-suite? Focus on continuous learning. This is a team sport, meaning it's not your opinion, but you've got to also listen and consider what's best for the company. involves, diversity of thought and doing what's best for the company. And then the other is mentorship. Jane brought it up. Who are your mentors? Stay in touch with them. Who are your business partners? Stay in touch with them, your colleagues, because you don't know who may be sitting on boards, because they could be great sources of references. And a lot of the opportunities can come from the contacts that in addition to the search firms. Technically, maybe 25 to 30% may come from search firms, and 70% could really come from internal contacts. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you all for attending today's webcast sponsored by the Serica Initiative. This webcast will be available for streaming on YouTube starting on Tuesday, March 10th. Thank you so much, and thank you for supporting us. Take care.